Reed Sheppard is leaving Kentucky to go to the NBA draft. And while we're all going to really miss Sheppard's talents, I think Mark Pope and company are going to be okay with their backcourt this upcoming season.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing Reed Sheppard leaving Kentucky to go to the NBA draft. At the end of the day, it's probably the best decision for Sheppard to go ahead and declare, and I think that Mark Pope and company are going to be okay with the backcourt that they bring in this upcoming season. Also on today's episode, we're really excited about Pope's offense, right? Well, I decided to bring on a former assistant coach that has gone against him to talk about Pope and his philosophy. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I'll admit it, I have a pretty competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly, so you can join your friends and download Monopoly Go today. It's now free on the App Store or Google Play. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed to the show. If you are listening on podcast, I would appreciate it if you are tuned in there as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Reed Sheppard is officially declaring for the NBA draft. Had a lot to say in a video that he posted to social media declaring so. He said, "I'm going all in. The opportunity I have is great. I've gotten really good feedback showing where I can be in the draft. I had an unbelievable year at Kentucky. It was such a fun year. It's not easy leaving the fans and the school that I dreamed of playing at. I need to do what's best for me, and that's heading to the NBA. According to ESPN, Sheppard is the number 7 prospect on their big board, I should say, SEC Freshman of the Year, and the stats are really, really solid. 12.5 points, 4.5 assists, 4.1 rebounds, 2.5 steals per game, while shooting 52% from 3 and 53% from the floor. According to ESPN, no first-round pick from college has shot over 50% from 3 on similar volume since Glenn Rice at Michigan in the 1988-89 season. It's a massive loss for Kentucky basketball to see Sheppard go, but at the same time, I don't think it's a shock. I don't think that this should be something that Kentucky fans should be melting down over, because we knew this was coming from the moment he started to really turn it on early in the season. The moment that we saw that, hey, Sheppard can come in and not just knock down threes at a 50% rate occasionally. No, he can do it every single night. We started to see that during the non-conference slate, and we had conversations here on the show about just recognizing and acknowledging that Sheppard is going to be a draft pick this upcoming season. We came into the year not thinking so, and we came out of it knowing, okay, he's definitely going to be a draft pick. At one point, if I'm not mistaken, The Athletic had him as the first overall pick. This is a lottery guy. This is a top 10 selection without a doubt. And I think that it really does make sense for Sheppard to leave Kentucky because of a couple of brief reasons we'll get to here. First of all, I think it's the financial aspect of it. If you're going to be a certified lottery pick, then you need to go ahead and get your name in there and go make money. I understand that Kentucky probably did some things behind the scenes to discuss NIL packages, getting some money for him if he played another season with UK. I know that Sheppard loves this place. I know it was a very difficult decision for him, but at the end of the day, lottery money is very difficult to pass up. And on top of that, the financial aspect of this, being a lottery pick and kind of signing that contract is going to be really important for Sheppard this year because of the unknown. And that's kind of the second point I want to get to here, is that this year's draft is not particularly strong, right? If Sheppard's going to be a lottery pick this year, we know that as a almost guaranteed certainty. But what about next season? What about next season with guys like Flagg coming in? What about guys like VJ Edgecombe coming in? AJ DeBonsta, I believe, is, if that's how you pronounce his name, is somebody else that could be in next year's draft, if I'm not mistaken. Kentucky is putting out a number of NBA draft picks, right? But Sheppard here, I think, has really timed this up well for this season in getting in this year's draft. Now, Dillingham, I think, could be somebody where you look at him and say, okay, he's probably going to be a potential lottery pick just about any given year. With Sheppard, you only get the small sample size and you only get 12 points per game. If he had come back for another season and he had, developed even further somehow, I think you could make a strong case for him again in next year's lottery, but a first-round pick nonetheless, by the way. But I'm just going to sit here and say today, not knowing what your draft status could be next year is scary, knowing that you have the opportunity this year to go ahead and make millions. There's also no guarantee that he comes back to Kentucky, if we're talking about his development here and potentially entering a tougher draft. There's no guarantee that the man shoots 50% from three again. I mean, that's very, very difficult to do. It's actually, I would think, more likely for him to take a statistical dip in production and not necessarily show anything else than actually take a step forward. And something else for Reed individually that I was thinking about recently is how much does he want to come back to work with this team? I understand he loves Kentucky. I understand that he loves this place, but how much does he love the team? Because the team's going to be completely different. Everybody that he knew and played with and was close with is gone. Do you want to step back into that situation? Do you want to risk having your draft stock go down in a tougher draft class? Do you want to risk millions of dollars slipping away? And at the end of the day, I think it makes a ton of sense for Reed Sheppard to go ahead and declare. So again, big loss for UK. Big loss. But I also think that with what Mark Pope is going to do in the transfer portal, Kentucky's going to pick up some kids that if they pick up two kids that will I think, fit the mold of what Sheppard does, I think that's okay. I think if we're talking about doling out NIL money, I think that Kentucky, now that they have the ability to kind of spread their resources out over a couple of players instead of focusing on Reed, I think that Pope will find a way to spin that into a positive. So while Sheppard would have been an elite guard, I think, in Mark Pope's offense next season, the downsides and the potential of losing draft stock and money kind of outweighs that in my mind, at least for Sheppard. And I think at the end of the day, it does make sense why he's gone. A couple more quotes here for Sheppard. My teammates and coaches put confidence in me, telling me, you need to shoot. I was fortunate enough to be able to get into the gym and work with Kentucky assistant John Welch every day. He's one of the best trainers you'll find. I didn't know what to expect coming in. I wasn't going in with the expectations of what ultimately happened. I knew I was going to do whatever I could to help Kentucky win. If I needed to get the team water, I would get the team water. I was excited to be at my dream school. It's an unbelievable way it ended up. It's really been a fun journey so far. He also said the goal at Kentucky is to play for a national championship. I thought we had a good shot at it. Our team was special, and losing the way that we did was hard. All the relationships we built and how close we were made this decision a lot harder. Our families were close. Yes, Reed Sheppard said this, not Jeff Sheppard. Our families are very close. We stayed in touch and always watched his teams at BYU. Sheppard talking about Mark Pope. I know how smart he is as a coach and how offensive-minded his teams are. They run really good stuff, shoot a lot of threes, and are fun to watch. I think Kentucky will still be Kentucky when it's all over. So Reed Sheppard officially out at Kentucky basketball. Best of luck to Reed Sheppard, and we will be following his career with great interest on this show. Let me know what you think about Sheppard leaving in the comments below. Obviously a big loss for UK, an expected one at that, though, as well. Kentucky, I don't necessarily is going to have to do a lot of recovering here. I think they're already making moves in the portal to kind of fill this void here. Let me know what you think about it again. At Locked On UK on the socials, on Twitter is where you can find me. All right. I decided to bring on somebody that I'm a big fan of to talk about Mark Pope and his offense. And this guy just happens to be a former assistant coach that coached 3 years against Pope during his time at Utah Valley State. I want to dive into our conversation with Jordan Sperber of Hoops Vision 68 in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Monopoly Go. I've been told I'm a pretty competitive person, and we all have a competitive side at the end of the day, and my competitive side is a huge fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, and it's a great twist on Monopoly where you can play not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. The best part is I can mess with my friends. I can charge them rent on iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly, but I can also now heist their vaults and get riches for myself, and the leaderboards can show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. I've loved playing this game over the last few months with my friends. One of them got me hooked on it, I believe last November. If I'm not mistaken, and we've been all throwing down on it for quite some time now. And it's not just the competitive side, right? That's super awesome. You can also team up with friends and people around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So you need to get in the game and join your friends. You can download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or on Google Play. All right, continuing along here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you again. Want to remind you guys, if you have not subscribed to the show already, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. Trying to get to 10,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel, and trying to get as many people as possible over on the podcast feed. If you are tuned in and you are not subscribed, I know a lot of you on the YouTube feed are watching and you're not subbed. Join up. It's going to be a very, very fun off season. Okay, we've got a conversation with former New Mexico State men's basketball coach assistant Jordan Sperber, who also does a phenomenal job over at his YouTube channel, Hoop Vision 68 on Twitter. Also his YouTube channel. He did a couple of really good episodes about Mark Pope and his offense during his time at BYU. Just does a great job breaking down X's and O's, plays, statistics, anything you could ever want to learn about college basketball. Jordan is your guy. I've loved watching him over the past few years, just kind of him breaking down all kinds of stuff, not just Kentucky stuff, but different aspects of the game, and kind of explaining how basketball has kind of become more and more modernized. He's got some really good content out there. I would highly encourage you guys to go check out his videos about Mark Pope, about this offense, about what Kentucky's going to be looking like this year. But I decided I wanted to bring him in to have a conversation with you guys to explain what he thinks about the offense, what he thinks about Pope, and how he feels he's going to do in the SEC. So, without further ado, here is our conversation with Jordan Sperber. We are now excited to be joined by Jordan Sperber of Hoops Vision 68. Does a phenomenal job over on his YouTube channel breaking down X's and O's in college basketball statistics. Jordan, you've had a couple of really great videos over the past year or so about Mark Pope and his offense during his time with the BYU Cougars. Now that he's the head coach of Kentucky, a lot of people are starting to flock to some of those videos, getting to know about what he and his offense are about. Obviously, you cover a ton of college basketball just across the landscape, breaking down all different kinds of offenses and defenses. Can you kind of give us some insight here as to what you think the strengths of this Mark Pope personnel grouping and kind of offense is?
Yeah, so my experience with Mark Pope actually goes back to when he was the head coach of Utah Valley in his first head coaching job before BYU. I worked on the coaching staff at New Mexico State, and we were in the same conference as Utah Valley, so we played them at least twice a year, maybe 3 times in the conference tournament. And he's changed over the years. He's had different iterations of offenses, but there's a few things that are pretty much all constant with a Mark Pope offense. The most obvious, that just by looking at the statistics that you can notice this, is great spacing and tempo. So pace and space is kind of like the buzzword these days that definitely the NBA plays with, and BYU and Utah Valley have played with. The other part that might not be quite as obvious, dive into the film, that I think his teams are really, really good at, is reading the defense. So they tend to be somewhat repetitive on offense, running a lot of the same actions over and over again. But the way they use that as a strength is when the defense tries to guard that action one way, they have a counter towards it. Then when the defense changes up their coverage and tries to guard it a different way, they have a new counter. It's all about reading the defense and countering the defense. And this past BYU team this season in the Big 12 was especially good at that reading of the defense.
You look at some of their numbers from this past season on KenPom, top 100 team in adjusted tempo, top 14 in adjusted efficiency on offense. Really, really fun team, both inside and outside of the arc. But the big thing about BYU that you kind of talk about whenever it comes to some of the actions that they like to run is they like a lot of zoom action, which is something that is being utilized more and more in basketball over these past couple of decades. Can you describe to the audience kind of what zoom action is and how Mark Pope likes to utilize it?
Yeah, so it's definitely going to be an action that you're going to want to get to know if you're a Kentucky fan. And given Mark Pope's experiences with it. So zoom action is when a player sets a screen for another player off the ball. So you have on-ball screens and you have off-ball screens. We're talking about off-ball screens here. You set a screen for a player off the ball, and then that player sprints into a dribble handoff with the player that has the ball. So normally, kind of the most traditional way zoom action is run is there's a player in the corner, like by the 3-point line in the corner. The ball is at the top of the key in the center of the court. Someone sets a screen for the player in the corner, and then he runs up towards the top of the key to get the ball. And I made a video on Zoom about a year ago now, and I called it's like a ball screen on steroids. So essentially you're getting into a ball screen by running up into that dribble handoff, but by adding that extra movement, that extra action, and that extra screen, it makes it very hard for the defense to execute their ball screen coverage because the offensive player is coming into a sprint towards the ball.
Yeah, zoom action is definitely something I'm probably going to be talking about it a ton when it comes to kind of the personnel that Kentucky's keeping up with within the portal this offseason. Just kind of kids that are more comfortable running around constantly and kind of getting in these up-tempo systems. Kentucky obviously reaching out to a ton of those kids right now in the transfer portal. We'll see if they can land some of them. I've talked a ton. You probably know his name, Kobe Brea from Dayton. I would love to have a kid like that utilizing some zoom action in Kentucky's offense this season. But talking here about just kind of personnel in Mark Pope's system, obviously 1 year in the Big 12, 10-8 in his first year, really, really rugged conference to go through, just a tough conference night in and night out for every team, especially Kansas this year, which was a little bit of a surprise. When you're transitioning to a conference like the Big 12, Jordan, as somebody that's not, I assume, biased to either of these two conferences, what should the expectation be with Pope and his system kind of transitioning? Is this something where we see like a Nate Oates-like success rate where you have a high-octane offense that shoots a ton of threes that ends up finding success in the SEC? Is this going to be a little bit of a different transition? Is it going to be easier? Is it going to be harder? What do you think is going to happen here for Pope and company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that at the top of the SEC and the Big 12, there's a lot of similarities there. The teams at the top they're just good. You have the Kansases and the Baylors in the Big 12. Obviously, Houston is a newer team in the Big 12 that was extremely good this year. And then you have teams like Alabama and Auburn, and obviously Kentucky is in that mix as well. I think that there's similarities between the two leagues. I'd argue that the Big 12 has been a little bit deeper in recent years, maybe at the bottom, whereas the SEC has kind of bottomed out a little bit, like a team like a Vanderbilt or something like that been weaker, though they do have a new coach now. So I don't think that there's a huge adjustment. Obviously, the bigger adjustment was going from the WCC, which BYU was in, to the Big 12. And Mark Pope and BYU certainly overachieved and exceeded expectations in year one. But I don't see a huge difference in going from the SEC or in going from the Big 12 to the SEC. I think it's, they're two of the best leagues in the country. And, I don't think there has to be big tweaks to style of play to cater to this new league necessarily.
Final question too here, Jordan, before we let you get out of here. There's been a lot of conversation about whether Mark Pope will have success or not in his first job here at Kentucky. A lot of fans in my comment section just really concerned about his lack of quote unquote experience. Obviously, the dude's been a college basketball head coach for 9 to 10 years now. He's been an assistant coach in a variety of places, but apparently that's not good enough for a lot of Kentucky fans. And so the question I want to ask to you, and this is something that I went over at length yesterday, is do you believe that Mark Pope will have success as a relatively inexperienced head coach at Kentucky?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do. About a month ago, when the Michigan and Louisville jobs were open, I actually argued that Pope should have been one of the top candidates for those jobs. And this was, without the Kentucky. Obviously, he played at Kentucky and he has the alumni connection there. I thought that for those two of the best jobs in the coaching cycle, that Pope should have been involved in those. So I do think he'll have success. I mean, obviously the biggest adjustment is he goes from a very specific style of recruiting at BYU, where you're recruiting a lot of Mormons, just to be frank, a lot of players in the LDS church. And then they did have some success with getting non-Mormons from the transfer portal. But that's a really tough sell to get a non-Mormon to come to BYU. And now he's at one of the easiest places to recruit at, quote unquote easiest places to recruit at in the country. So it is a big difference. I know that I've listened to he had a radio show the other day, and I've listened to some of his interviews where, he wants to recruit for fit, not just for pure talent, which is a little bit different than I would say what Calipari did, getting the 5 stars and really trying to get the best players possible and then figuring out how to make it work from there. So recruiting will definitely be different. But he's not like he was an NBA player and he came from the NBA, but he's not one of these NBA guys that jumped right into a head coaching job. And he was an assistant coach at BYU under Dave Rose, who's a really good head coach, now retired. And I don't see the experience as a problem. And I do think that he'll be able to make the adjustment towards different recruiting activity. And I just don't see the X's and O's as a problem at all. I think he'll excel there.
Awesome stuff, Jordan. Thank you so much for hopping on the show today. I just want to tell you, you do a great job over at Hoop Vision 68, your YouTube channel. Please tell everybody where they can find you on socials, on your YouTube channel, on your website. Plug everything here.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, it's Hoop Vision 68 on both Twitter /X and on YouTube. If you haven't watched my video on BYU's offense from last year, that would be kind of the number one thing that I would promote to Kentucky fans. It's called The Team That Plays Offense Like a Video Game. If you search that, I think you can also just search Mark Pope offense into YouTube and it'll probably pop right up. But that's Hoop Vision 68, the YouTube channel. And I hope that watching that video can get you a little bit more educated on your new coach's offensive style.
Going to do everything I can to plug your stuff in the description and the comments section. Thank you so much for hopping on with us, Jordan, today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Lance.
All right, that was our conversation with Jordan Sperber of Hoop Vision 68. Just a phenomenal job he does over on his YouTube channel. Again, links in the description to his Twitter and his YouTube channel. Go and follow Jordan's work. I'm sure he's going to be talking a lot over the next few months about Mark Pope in this offense with Kentucky whenever they do finally put some tape out there on the court. Again, just anything you want to know about basketball analytics, about just breaking down X's and O's, Jordan is your guy. I really appreciate him coming on the show, and I would highly encourage you, go give him a follow. He absolutely deserves it. All right, we've got some transfer portal players I want to talk about here to wrap up the show. 3 new additions to Kentucky basketball's list of portal players. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place? Well, with Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you are looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They're the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, and independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. They've got over 90 million users each month within their community, and their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, you can visit the brand behind every great investor over at yahoofinance.com. It's the #1 finance destination, yahoofinance.com. Check it out today. One more time, that is yahoofinance.com. All right, wrapping up the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Let's get to some transfer portal pieces, shall we? 3 new additions to transfer portal madness for Kentucky basketball. 2 of these guys from the Big 12, one of them from the ACC. Let's start with, I think, the most interesting prospect that Kentucky has reached out to out of these 3. Let's start with Pop Isaacs of Texas Tech. Pop Isaacs at 6'2", 170 pounds, solid guard for the Red Raiders this past season. Solid, I say, but not necessarily the most efficient shooter. This past year, he shot 29.3% from beyond the arc and just 40% from inside the arc. You take a look at some of his analytical numbers. He shoots 30% on right break threes. That's 27% of his field goal attempts. His shot form, I put in my notes, it's nasty work. While it does work for Isaacs, it's a little bit of a slower jump shot for a 6'2" guard. He loves to shoot from deep. He hit a ton of deep threes this past season, but 29% from 3 is just frankly subpar. 30% on right break threes is not great for a right-handed shooter. He shoots 48% at the rim. That's a quarter of his field goal attempts. That's not a great number either. The positive here for Isaacs is he's got a 22% assist rate, which is very solid for a guard, and he's really good off of ball screens as well, just kind of creating there. The other thing I need to note is during his freshman season, he shot a ton of threes, just like he did this past year, and he shot almost 38%. He shot 37.8% from beyond the arc, which is way better than what he did this past year. So he can be a really solid shooter from beyond the arc. He's just, and I don't think ever going to be anything consistent inside, and that's kind of where my concerns are with Isaacs. He's quick. He can distribute the basketball. He's definitely got that in him. He doesn't have an extremely high turnover rate to boot with that as well. It's not something that's like a huge problem with his game. He's a good free throw shooter. He dominated possessions for Texas Tech this past season in his sophomore year. I think he needs a little bit more time to develop, but look at what he did against BYU in the 2 games that they played. In the first game that Pop Isaacs played against BYU, 32 points, 5 of 10 from inside the arc, 6 of 9 from beyond the arc. 32 freaking points. And then in the Big 12 tournament against BYU, 22 points, 6 of 12 shooting, 3 of 7, or 6 of 12 inside the arc, 3 of 7 from beyond the arc. He went off against Mark Pope. I can understand why Pope would want to reach out to him. He knows that this kid has high potential, at least against what he had on display last year. And I don't blame him. But if we're talking about ranking guards that Kentucky is looking at in the portal, I would not have Isaacs high on my list relative to other guys. That is not to say he's a bad player. I think he has a lot of potential, which is why I wanted to talk about him. Let's get to a player that I am actually really intrigued with, like really intrigued with coming out of Oklahoma State. Not Javon Small, Brandon Garrison. If you don't know who this kid is, he's a former McDonald's All-American in 2023, 6'11", 250 as a freshman. He's a big kid. He's got some physicality to him. He shoots 67% at the rim. That's 2/3 of his field goal attempts. Again, high 4-star, top 40 prospect. He's got solid post work. Doesn't go to it that often. He's in the 19th percentile of post-up scores, but what Garrison was an excellent pick and roll, pick and pop man for OSU this past year. Love his effort, love his aggression, love his ability to just dominate at different times as a freshman in the PNR PNP game. He shoots 30% at the right elbow on middies, which is not great. That's 30. That's like I think a little under 30% of his field goal attempts when he's on the floor. But he shoots 47% at the left elbow, which is quite frankly very, very good. Especially for a freshman, especially for a 6'11", 250 freshman. He's got a solid block rate as well. He was top 100 in that category this past year. 6% block rate. I think that could go up as he builds more strength. And he worked really well with Javon Small. And again, in that pick and roll kind of game, pick and pop kind of game where he can extend out past the free throw line and knock down some mid-range jumpers from the left side. I like Garrison's game. As a freshman, those numbers jump off the page. If you watch him, you really do get to see just the high intensity, the energy, the excitement. I liked Garrison as a prospect, and I like him even more after 1 year in college. I would love to see Garrison get a visit. I think that Arkansas is also in the running here with Coach Cal. Again, top high-profile recruit. Of course, Cal's going to go after him. But for Kentucky, they need to get this kid on a visit. He's somebody that I would have high on my list. And then the final player I want to talk about here today out of Wake Forest, Andrew Carr. Power forward, not a center for Wake Forest. He would work at the 4 for Kentucky. He is listed at 6'10", 220. He would be a fifth-year senior, and he's got some pretty solid numbers to boot. He shot 67% at the rim. That was a little under half of his field goal attempts. He's got an odd jumper, like an odd load-up jumper, but he shot really consistently. He has some moves as a ball handler. He can body somebody up on a drive to the basket. He shot 39% on right break threes. He only shot 25% on right corner threes, which is not great. But as a whole, he shot 37.1% in his second season at Wake Forest. He spent 2 years at Delaware before transferring to the Demon Deacons. He shot 40% in his final year at Delaware, by the way, from beyond the arc. So the kid has a strap. He can also handle. He can drive. He's not dishing out assists. That's not a part of his game. He's not a big passer. But he's got a pretty low turnover rate as well. He's got a 5% block rate, which is really good for a power forward. He is also just a really interesting scorer off of different actions. So he's in the 87th percentile of post-up scores. He and Garrison, Brandon Garrison would work really well, I think. He's in the 76th percentile of roll/pop scores, so he's utilized with point guards pretty heavily. That's why he's not an assist man. He's usually being given the ball. He's in the 91st percentile of cut scores. So he'd work really well with another passing big or a really solid passing guard that works well in PNR. So I think that somebody like Javon Small, I think David Coit could work well here. I think somebody like, you could get Jackson Robinson involved here. Richie Saunders is somebody that I think could also work well in PNR if Mark Pope wanted to go get him out of the portal. There are so many different options that I think would work well with Garrison, with Carr. I'd like to see these kids get some visits, kind of get some more things going with them. Let me know what you think in the comments below about these portal players. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.